You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter. This is Inspire Change.
I want to introduce a tradition here for this podcast and all future podcasts, wherein I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. They are the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. I pay my respects to the elders, past and present. Knowing the stories of the Aboriginal people will always be written in this landscape. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspired Change. I hope you found the last few episodes inspiring, helpful, good food for thought, and, have made you consider some of the ways in which you can live your life differently, better, right? Because that's ultimately where we're looking to head to. Now, obviously, this has sparked, some thinking, because I got an email from somebody who had a very interesting and, from my perspective, really, really important question. And he asked me to get into how he can hold himself personally accountable in life and do so in a healthy but effective way. Now, before I go on into getting into the nitty-gritty of this, let me just say that this is probably one of the most common issues that I get to deal with my clients, whether that be in counselling, therapy, whether it's in coaching. It's a fairly persistent part of the conversation, the meaningful conversation that I have with people. And that doesn't, change whether the person's 15 or whether they're 50. And probably if I scratch enough along the surface, I'll get it in the third age further along the line as well. So, let's define this a little bit. So if you say, I tend to be personally accountable, you need to ask yourself a few questions first before you actually quite confidently state that. Okay, so the first question that I would put to you is, do you have a tendency to procrastinate? Do you tend to dodge stuff that's of benefit to you and others? Do you do things at the very last moment? Do you do things at a time where it creates conflict with others? More importantly, and this is the thing that came out of this particular email, do you treat yourself in that space like, quote unquote, a piece of garbage when you stuff up? Alternatively, is it always someone else's fault or the fault of the circumstances? In other words, are you a victim? Do you hold yourself up as a victim? So that's a really, really interesting way of coming into this problem. Now, the questions are really important because we do need to start with introspection. We need to ask ourselves some serious questions about how I am around these issues. Now, most of us, in a way, create this fancy little story often that is really simply about dodging accountability. Why? Because when I say I'm going to do something and then I don't, I create a condition called cognitive dissonance. The difference between what I want to be real and what is real. And in this case, the dissonance is about my own self-image. There are a couple of authors, Tavris and Aronson, in their book Mistakes We Made But Not By Me, explain it this way. When we make mistakes, we must calm the cognitive dissonance that jars our feelings of self-worth. And so we create fictions that absolve us of responsibility. In other words, restoring our belief that we're smart, moral, and right. A belief that is dumb, immoral, and wrong. It's an interesting way of putting it, right? But if you think about it and you really dig into it, we all constantly tell ourselves stories. But the one that I want to sort of, get into is, why is this such a problem? Why is, this an issue that persistently comes up, and especially with a lot of guys, right? So let me put this into the spotlight. So what really is personal accountability? Well, the easiest way to talk about it is the ability to take ownership for our thoughts, feelings, and actions. In other words, it means that you choose to take responsibility for your words, your actions, your behaviours, and the outcomes that they produce, as well as managing those outcomes if necessary. And that you do what you tell yourself you will do. Now, putting it in another way, I could then say, well, if you and I were in a relationship together, could I trust you? Right? Because if you're going to tell me that you're going to do something, my first instinct is to believe you. Now, the problem is, after a while, what might happen is that you actually don't deliver on your promise. So that becomes a really serious issue, because if I can't trust you, I can't really work well with you if we're in a work setting. And if I'm in a relationship with you, in an intimate relationship, then I'm just going to get frustrated and ultimately resentful, which means, again, I don't trust you, and we are not in an intimate relationship. We're in a thing where we circle each other, hopefully that this thing will work or not, okay? So it's especially problematic. So the elements, because let's talk about, how do I address this? So how do I make myself personally accountable in life? And how do I do it in a healthy but effective way? Well, this is where a particular little theory, self-determination theory, comes into play, which is, the question is, are you motivated from within or from without? Okay, so from the environment. So in psychology, we talk about intrinsic motivation, which is that my motivation comes from inside, or am I motivated by my environment and the consequences that my environment might throw up for me? In other words, am I going to get into the shit if I don't do this? Now, interesting thing about this is a lot of people actually have an internal dialogue that makes you feel terrible. We talked about, do you feel like a piece of garbage when you stuff up? For other people, it's even more intense. They get down into the depth, the grimy depth of their own pain, wherein their incapacity or their refusal to take personal ownership makes them feel guilty and ashamed, which ironically perpetuates the problem and doesn't actually deal with it very effectively. So the first cab off the rank is take a check into how you relate to yourself, right? Are you super, super critical? In transactional analysis, we talk about the critical parent and the wounded child. Now, my experience with most people that I've ever worked with who have a struggle in this area is they often suffer from childhood trauma, or at least a very problematic relationship with themselves, wherein you can see the narcissistic wound that they're suffering, and they compensate for that, but often not very well. So the really good narcissist basically learns how to defend themselves against the narcissistic wound by creating the story about how good they are and how intelligent and how creative, or whatever it is that floats their boat. They're just good at it. They're brilliant at it. In fact, there's probably no one better than them at it. And so, the story that we make up to deal with the cognitive dissonance becomes one where we actually minimise the facts. We might dodge the bullet, we might claim some responsibility, but not all of it. And, we often maybe draw in past experiences to, explain it away. We also shift the target to something that's less of a problem and pretend that that's the issue. The really cute one that I often see is that, we compare ourselves to somebody else who's got the same problem, but that we're just slightly better than them. So, one of the things that we really need to get down into is then improving our relationship with ourselves. So how do I do that? Well, in a nutshell, one of the things that actually helps is the capacity to reparent myself. And a lot of times it's better to do that in therapy, but you can do it yourself as well. So shed the poor me track. That narrative has got to go. So the next step is to go, I'm probably better off thinking about what the benefits of personal accountability are rather than the pain points. I particularly like that one. So we more than likely are going to feel less stressed if we're personally accountable. It also elevates our relationship with ourselves because, again, not only are we feeling less stressed, but we are actually seeing an improvement in what's called in psychology self-efficacy. And the chances are that as a result, you probably are going to take more action than you did before because you're not going to procrastinate. It actually feels good to get stuff done. You can give yourself a pat on the back, not in a delusional sense, but rather just realistically, I had all this stuff going on this week and I got through all of it. And even if I didn't get through all of it, that would have still been okay. Okay? So part of this is also the fact that not only are we going to trust ourselves more, but you're also going to be able to trust others more because what you're going to do is you're going to pay attention to what they do and not just what they say. And so overall in this picture, what happens is that our relationships improve. It doesn't matter whether they're family, my partner, or work relationships, and especially at work. So take the pain point out of this. Don't leave it to the last moment. Don't create stories to excuse your own ineptness in your own procrastination. And as Fritz Perl once said so eloquently, if you're going to do something, shit or get off the pot, right? And that's self-explanatory. But a lot of us are ambivalent. Some of us are avoidant. And some of us are anxious in our relationship to whatever it is that we do. So we come back to that fundamental, vital point of what is my attachment to myself in my relationship with self. And can I find points of satisfaction? Or am I going to be steeped in this self-critical, judgmental space where no matter what I do, I will never be good enough? And in rational emotive behaviour therapy, one of the irrational beliefs that has a persistent and encompassing impact, negative impact, is the idea that somehow I am not good enough in this world. And the only way to get by is to create an avatar that fakes it. All right. So what people come to me with often in that context is the imposter syndrome. Now, this might all sound very easy in a sense to, if we address these issues, then I'm going to stop doing what I'm doing, which is I'm going to, tear shreds off myself to stay motivated. Because for some people, this works. I mean, I've worked with lots of clients who are highly, highly successful, but their internal dialogue is diabolical. they relate to themselves like they are literally a piece of shit. Now, you might be able to do that for some time, but eventually it sort of wears thin. Imagine being your own friend and you keep getting this dialogue about how crap you are. Eventually you're going to leave that relationship. It's unbearably painful and disturbing and distressing. So why inflict that on yourself when you can actually change it? And this is my challenge to everyone out there. If you are consciously doing that in your head to yourself all the time, get in touch, and it's often preceded by the feeling first. So you feel like, I'm not going to do this right now, it's too hard, or whatever story you've concocted, right? And then your thinking is going to kick in. Now, usually you avoid thinking about what you need to do or how you need to be in these circumstances until it's unavoidable, until you run into some potential or real consequence that is about to happen and descend upon your, head. At that point, you need to go, okay, what is it that I'm telling myself here that is setting myself, that is a sabotage, a self-sabotage, right? And part of it is this wicked little story that you might have cocked up in your head about, cognitive dissonance and how, you got to make things, you got to massage it to fit your created self-image, to preserve that self-image. You need to get real with yourself. Strip down. Get naked. Right? What are you really doing? Am I really the person that I'm pretending to be? And if the case is no, then get real. Who are you really? Then go, who do I want to be and how do I want to achieve that? How do I want to get there? Right? Because ultimately the best sort of motivation is intrinsic, and it's in a constructive way. If you keep beating your dog trying to teach him a trick, eventually that dog's going to bite you. Whereas if you, are teaching the dog the new trick, and every time he gets the new trick, you give him a treat, that dog's going to be your pal forever. He'll lick you rather than bite you. It might be a poor metaphor, but it certainly in some instances is very descriptive. So in this instance, it is your relationship with yourself. If you make your relationship, if you work on your relationship to be safe and secure in yourself, with yourself, then you're going to get more satisfaction because you're going to be more effective in getting the things that you want to do done without the price of either pretending something that you're not or constantly having to go through the stress of justifying yourself to yourself and others. And that's a pain in the neck. It's stressful, tiring, drains you of energy. Because most of the time, all you're going to be feeling is either anxious or helpless and hopeless. Step out of that role. Move into a space where you exercise your autonomy in your relationship with yourself, improve your competence, and be real with others. If you can't do it or you're struggling to do it, let people know before it turns into a shit fight. The biggest problem that I get with a lot of business people, with clients, is if they've got a difficult client, they tend to avoid them. All it does is piss the other person off. The client gets angry. And then the business owner goes, they were really, really angry with me. That stops me from wanting to, reach out to them. Well, you set that up. Right? Same as if you don't tell the truth in your relationship. You're setting this up to be a problem for yourself, ultimately also for the other person, because you're intentionally, deliberately taking actions that are going to erode trust and commitment in that relationship, and it's also sure as hell going to bump up conflict. So don't give me the whingy thing about I can't help it. Of course you can. You can change your thoughts and you can modulate your feelings. That's called emotional maturity. And therefore you can make better decisions than you've done before in the past. Like it's not rocket science here, guys. But we make it more complicated than what it is. And there's volumes of books and stuff written about this, ranging from the good to the simply atrocious. I mean, even on this one, Jordan Peterson got it right. Get a backbone, stand up and be counted. I've got absolutely no problem with that at all. So this is where I want you to think. I want you to think about personal accountability. Own it. At the very least, you can own what you think, what you feel, and what you do. And you can then effectively, to some degree or another, deal with the negative consequences should they arise. And usually, folks, they're a lot less than we've been catastrophizing about. And on that note, I'm going to leave you to it. Don't catastrophize. Own it. Get on with it. Until next time, this is me signing off.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit makinggoodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda at noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.